Okay, let's dive right into this. Welcome to The Explainer. Now, if you've been glued to the news over the last 48 hours, you already know that the geopolitical tectonic plates in the Gulf, well, they've just violently shifted, and then, almost instantly, slammed on the brakes. We're looking at a sudden, frankly shocking pause of a major U.S. military operation in literally one of the most vital waterways on the planet. It's a situation that's developing at breakneck speed, it's full of mixed messages, and it carries massive global implications. So let's look at the facts. To truly untangle this complex standoff, we're going to look at four key areas. First, the sudden pause. Second, the two distinct military operations. Third, the competing claims of victory. And finally, the global ripple effect.
Let's start with Section 1, the sudden pause, and how Project Freedom was abruptly halted. The absolute defining feature of this whole event is just the sheer speed of it. We're talking about a level of whiplash that has taken the international community completely by surprise. Look at how incredibly fast this evolved over just a matter of days, even hours. So, back in mid-April, the U.S. blockade of Iranian ports kicks off. Fast forward to Sunday, and President Donald Trump announces Project Freedom, which is framed as this humanitarian gesture to escort commercial ships trapped in the Gulf. Okay, makes sense. But then, on Tuesday morning, U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio announces that Operation Epic Fury, that's the offensive stage against Iran, has successfully concluded. And then, just hours later on Tuesday evening, boom, Project Freedom is suddenly paused. Literally less than 48 hours after it was announced, the whole escort mission is completely frozen.
Now, what's truly fascinating here is the exact wording the president used to explain this sudden halt. On social media, President Trump wrote, quote, "Project Freedom will be paused for a short period of time to see whether or not the agreement can be finalized and signed," end quote. He specifically pointed out that this pause was mutually agreed upon, based on what he called great progress toward a complete and final agreement with representatives of Iran, along with requests from other nations.
Moving on to Section 2. Two distinct military operations. We really need to look at these overlapping actions.
To clear up the absolute massive media confusion going on right now, we really have to carefully separate out these overlapping actions. First up, we have Operation Epic Fury. This is the official name for the initial U.S.-Israeli offensive against Iran. And as we just talked about, Secretary of State Marco Rubio gave a briefing at the White House confirming that this specific operation is officially over. According to Rubio, the U.S. has successfully achieved its objectives for that offensive stage of the war. So that part of the conflict, the direct offensive strikes, is done, concluded.
And this brilliantly illustrates why we have to separate the paused mission from the active one. Project Freedom, which, again, was that humanitarian commercial escort mission through the Strait of Hormuz, that's the one that's been paused. But the U.S. port blockade, that operation is still entirely active and in full force. Announced back in mid-April, this blockade targets any vessel providing material support to Iran, including so-called dark fleet vessels. In fact, U.S. Central Command reported that they've already redirected 51 vessels under this blockade. So while the escorts have stopped, the economic pressure squeezing Iranian ports, that has absolutely not stopped.
Which brings us to Section 3, competing claims of victory, where these colliding narratives really come into play. Whenever you have an abrupt halt in a highly polarized conflict like this, the information war just goes into absolute overdrive. It's fascinating and honestly a bit surreal to watch. We have the exact same event being spun into completely opposite realities. The U.S. narrative, coming directly from the President and the Secretary of State, is that this pause is the result of great progress toward a final diplomatic deal and that their military objectives were achieved. Meanwhile, Iranian state media is framing this, well, entirely differently. The hardline Tasnim news agency and the state-run IRNA are actually calling this an American defeat. They're claiming that President Trump has retreated and that he's using the pause to basically cover up the failure of the operation to reopen the waterway. It's literally the exact same pause, but two totally different realities being presented to their respective publics. But behind all these very public, very loud claims of victory, there are intense diplomatic backchannels moving at absolute light speed. The U.S. specifically cited a request from Pakistan, who's been stepping up to act as a crucial mediator between Washington and Tehran. At the exact same time, China's Foreign Minister Wang Yi just met with Iran's Abbas Araghchi over in Beijing to discuss regional developments. And looming over all of this like a giant shadow is President Trump's highly anticipated visit to Chinese President Xi Jinping next week. That's a trip that was actually delayed when the strikes on Iran first began. So make no mistake, the global heavyweights are very actively negotiating off-camera right now.
And that leads us to our final section, Section 4. The global ripple effect and the real-world, tangible consequences of all this. So the crucial point is, what does all this political posturing and military maneuvering actually mean for you and me? Let's take a look at the sheer economic gravity of the Strait of Hormuz. Just under normal circumstances, roughly 20%, that's a full fifth of the entire world's oil and liquefied natural gas, passes right through this single narrow little waterway. On top of that, you've got about 33%, a third of the global fertilizer trade moving through there too. That is a massive, massive slice of global trade currently being held hostage by the standoff. Any disruption here doesn't just affect the Middle East, it literally sends shockwaves rippling through every single supply chain on Earth.
And you can see that disruption causing immediate real-world panic. $10 billion. That is the massive emergency package, 10 billion Australian dollars, that was just announced by Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese to secure their energy supplies. Because of this crisis, Australia is rushing to set up a government-owned fuel reserve just to boost their critical supplies of diesel and jet fuel to 50 days. They've been getting hit with massive spikes in petrol prices since the hostilities started, and they are now literally spending billions to insulate themselves from the fallout of this exact geopolitical choke point. But, beyond the billions of dollars, we really have to look at the staggering human toll here. 22,500. That is the number of commercial mariners who are currently trapped. The Pentagon states that these 22,500 sailors are stuck out there on 1,550 vessels right in the middle of the Gulf. There's this growing, urgent concern over their dwindling supplies, not to mention the severe toll this takes on the physical and mental health of these seafarers. They're basically caught right in the crossfire of a massive geopolitical standoff with absolutely no way out.
Which brings us to the ultimate question facing the globe today. With Project Freedom paused, the blockade still highly active, and tens of thousands of mariners trapped at sea, we have to ask ourselves, is this sudden pause a genuine off-ramp to a finalized peace agreement, just like the diplomatic channels are suggesting? Or is it merely a brief calm before a massive economic storm? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. I highly encourage you to keep your eyes locked on the strait, because whatever happens next, it's going to impact all of us.